Team, in this video, we're going to look at planning considerations in the event of an SHTF scenario with an emphasis on area and route reconnaissance. Now, there are a variety of factors to consider when planning on how to get home. You can think about mission variables, operational variables, A-scope, ACOCA, and so much more that I've outlined in my SHTF field manual. In this video, I want to actually work through some of this process with you as I prepare for Tecumseh Fallen. That's Tacoma, by the way, but it may as well be the Northwest Compton. In this next video that's going to come out in this short series, this is kind of a two-parter. This one with the reconnaissance and the next one with the execution. That'll be the escape from Tacoma, and I'm certainly looking forward to it. So one of the first things that I did in planning for this exercise is how most reconnaissance begins with, right? And that's quick step back, right? So reconnaissance is not so much going out and gathering information, although it is. What you're really doing is proving your assumptions to be true. So I know for this scenario that I'm going to start off somewhere in Tacoma, probably near the Tacoma Dome, and I need to get down to University Place, which is a green zone, if you will, in this area. Completely different, just on the other side of freeway. And so I already kind of know the area because I've lived up here for a few years, but I want to make sure that what I am thinking is actually going to be actionable. And so where most reconnaissance begins with is looking at maps. It's conducting a map reconnaissance. And so when I did this, I'm looking at, how streets are laid out. Or do they generally run north and south, east and west? You don't want to get turned around. And we can see up here that is generally the case, although there is a section of Tacoma where that is absolutely not the case. It could be super easy to get turned around in that area. When I think about the natural and man-made features, the known friendly locations, so thinking about community centers, hospitals, police departments, fire departments, college campuses, and not saying that they're academically friendly, but certainly low crime areas comparatively to the rest of this area. Knowing what the hostile areas are, right? It wasn't too terribly long ago when we had a huge shootout between the Rangers and the Crips up here. So I want to try to avoid the hilltop area as much as I can. Looking through and determining primary and alternate routes, even knowing walking through this that I need to be more fluid than having a set specific route. Like I'm not doing a route to work and back and it's permissive. I need to be able to make adjustments on the fly. And I also need to realize and recognize that a straight line shot is, although that may be faster, is probably not the safest. As well as looking for resources, and one of the primary things that I'm actually out here looking for are sources of water. And the next step I'm going to do in my map reconnaissance is actually use the historical crime data that we have up here, and this is to help prove some of my assumptions. So there's a great resource for this specific area, and it targets and highlights each and every single piece of crime activity that's happened. And when it initially starts out, you got like way too much data, but I can kind of zoom this in to just the last 365 days. I can go and I can pinpoint on each of these specific locations and see what kind of crime was happening, because some crime I don't care about, but some of it I do, right? Look at, were these just vehicle thefts, or were people being assaulted, murdered, raped, assaulted in other ways? And this is all going to play a key point in how I plan on moving through these areas. I can use Google Earth. I can get a better feel, especially in 3D, of actually being able to visualize how these areas are laid out, and specifically the elevation gain, and thinking about everything, all of those variables that are out there when it comes to working through an urban environment like this. A map recon is never enough. We need to get out and we need to drive these routes. We're looking at and thinking about choke points. Where, if I was an adversary, where would I want to set up either a checkpoint, a hasty ambush? Where are the people most likely to be congregating? Because I want to avoid people at all costs, right? To a certain degree anyways. Thinking about the considerations as it relates to the specific location that we're operating in, the freeways, the bridges, the buildings, the historical crime data, as we talked about, the sociological and economical variables, and most likely courses of action that the local populace may take in a SHTF scenario. As I'm driving the area, I'm thinking about routes, primary, alternate, places I can use for holdup sites, where I might be able to execute dog legs, the neighborhoods I want to try to avoid altogether, whether it's due to crime, gangs, and homelessness, and areas, neighborhoods that I may want to try to get into because of the less likely or probability event that these areas may be hostile towards having somebody simply moving through their neighborhood. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and comments, down below, specifically as you're seeing what I'm seeing here. We're looking at all of these built up in these urban areas. What areas would you look to avoid, and what areas would you look to maybe try to be a preference for you? As I'm driving around, I'm looking and I'm thinking about different things. How many people are just naturally about walking around? Do they feel safe and secure inherently in a permissive environment, knowing that that's obviously going to change? But it tells you a lot about neighborhoods when you see people walking about. Areas like these shopping districts, man, I think I'm going to try to avoid these as much as I can. Again, thinking about the train, we saw it in Google Earth, but these are hills that I'm gonna have to hump up, so it's definitely a huge consideration, especially with the heat. We are in downtown Compton. Man, there's so many people in these areas, and there's actually not a lot of resources when it comes to first responders. You got one major police station, there's only a couple fire departments, plenty of hospitals. And there are a lot of churches, but when I'm driving around and look at some of these, like some of these areas have a lot of just natural security around them. Like, who puts fences around churches? That tells you something about the neighborhood that these are in. I want to get out and I want to drive through some of these crapped out areas, and I want to get into these alleys. Would you walk through an alley like this in a SHTF? You're trying to get home, or would you not? Let me know down in the comments. And this is over closer to the mall, which is an area that I'm going to avoid. But I think we need to say that we know in an SHTF scenario that these areas are all going to be outright filled with people. Like, looters are going to be destroying these urban shopping districts and areas, right? We see it all the time. But it's hard to see everything when you're driving 35 miles an hour. So the next phase of this reconnaissance is putting boots on the ground with rigs, as well as getting the bike out for a ride and doing some walking about, because you're going to be able to see the trees in the forest. When you do this map reconnaissance, when you get out and you're driving, you're kind of only seeing the hilltops, right? You're just seeing these treetops, and you can see the forest, you can see this urban jungle, but you can't actually see the tracks, the sign. You can't smell and use your other senses about you to be able to really make a calculated decision on what it is that you want to try to get done. Do people notice when you're walking about? What are the placards and signs that people have up on their windows and out in their yards? These can tell you a lot about a neighborhood, but it also can tell you obviously a lot about that individual homeowner or renter as well. A bunch of liberal leftist signs, you may in theory think, I want to stay away from these people, but the likelihood of them posing a threat to you is dramatically less. So these might actually be areas that you want to try to work through as opposed to avoiding. So we saw that we conducted this reconnaissance, one in our vehicle, and then 2 on a bike, and then 3 actually going through and look at some of these areas on foot. And so the reason I did that is because just to help demonstrate that you don't want to set a pattern in your operations. If you do the same thing the same way every single time, then ultimately you're going to establish a pattern that people can pick up. And if you're driving through the street and you're driving through these same routes all the time, then you're leaving stimulus for people to pick up. It's probably stimuli. I don't know. I'm not a freaking English doctor, but you're leaving crumbs and sign for people to remember you. I've seen you here before. I saw you walking here. I've seen you riding your bike on the street. I know who you are, and that's not what we want to do. So by breaking this up over the course of several weeks is what we kind of put into this, and doing it in several different ways. If I went through again right now, nobody would absolutely nobody would know or recognize that I had been in these areas, even in these neighborhoods, walking on their sidewalks. They have no recollection of me, right? So I think that's a key point to remember. And this is one of the areas that I'm most concerned about, is where to cross 16. It's one of the biggest linear danger areas that I'm gonna have to contend with. Even these alleys look and feel a whole lot different when you're on foot or on a bike, as opposed to being able to drive through. And the trash that we see out on the roads, these are all signs that we may look at and think about when we see it, and we're like, gosh, or we may not, right? We may not even notice it. But if you stop to look at it, that tells you a lot about the populace for the area that you're working in. Do they generally have respect for their city, or do they not give a damn? So we talked about areas that we can use for dog legs, and as I was riding my bike, I was like, well, you know what? Let me take a closer look at this bank, because you got natural roundabouts, and nobody, generally speaking, just walks around a building and maybe cuts back the same way that they were, or something to this effect, right? But as I'm going around this bank, I noticed that this bank had a water faucet on the outside, of course, this one would take a 4-way key, but that gets me thinking about what I may need in my kit bag. I also think it's important, as we're going through, to just stop, just move to some of these areas and take a pause, right? Rest in place for a minute. Observe the people without moving. Just sit there 5 minutes. What do you see? What do you hear? Take this all in, write it down in your memory or on a notebook. That way you can think about it again before you step out. All right, man, we got shopping carts for days on every road that you can shake a stick at, near any, shopping area. But here we also have an area that's under construction. And this is another danger area that I would try to avoid. Like, you may think, hey, man, this would be a great place to try to get into and get some shelter. But I would dare say that would be an area that I would avoid, because I think that criminals and hoodlums and thugs are thinking the exact same thing. They want to get in there and steal stuff, hang out, shoot things up, shoot themselves up. So that's an area that I'm going to try to avoid. We do have a lot of bike routes in this area, which have their own pros and cons to them, but I think it's good to get out there and take a look at them. And here we are, again, this is 16. This is an area that this is my, and again, right, this is 16 that we're running next to, and this is the linear danger area. I need to figure out where I'm going to cross. This is definitely a neighborhood that I would not try to avoid, I don't think. Probably not a single one of these dudes has a firearm. And of course, the last thing that you need to do when all of these, reconnaissance is done, we've driven the routes, we've walked the routes, is we need to do all of this at night, because everything is going to change once that sun goes down and them street lamps go on. And so the last consideration is, what kind of equipment do I want in my get home bag? And this is, you could probably find a plethora of videos on everything that you need in a get home bag, and all of them sound well and good, but most of the times I have found, and I've been guilty of this a few times myself, of people creating a kit bag specifically for a video. It's not what they actually keep in their vehicle. You know, we put all this stuff together and then we make a video and say, this is what you need to do. I'm not telling you this is what you need to do, but this is what you need to do and carry. So we want to take our specific areas and think about what it is that we want. For an example, I'll tell you right now, like for being able to get home, I honestly don't care in an urban environment, specifically when it's not freaking, 30 degrees below zero or anything. I'm not overly concerned about shelter, right? I'm not overly concerned about shelter. I can find and make a means of covering and protecting myself if it came down to that, right? In the summertime, I'm also not concerned about a core body temperature. At least, I am, but I'm not concerned about my core body temp decreasing. I'm concerned about it increasing again. So I'm thinking primarily about how to stay hydrated as we move along these routes, as well as finding areas that may provide some natural shade and getting off trail in some of these areas and using some of these wooded areas as opposed to sticking to the sidewalks where that heat is just rising and reflecting back up on me. And another consideration, and this is probably one of the biggest ones that too many times we don't talk about, is our communications pace plan, right? And I know in this area, and the go-to would be, well, I don't know what most people's go-to are. I can tell you I'm not going to use my cell phone, and I'll walk through in the video what I'm going to do to with some considerations that I have about what I want to do with my cell phone. But I also know that through some extensive testing that using any sort of handheld radio in an urban environment it's problematic, right? So even with 8 watts, I can only transmit out to maybe eight clicks, right? That's as far as I can transmit out. So moving again from like the Tacoma Dome all the way down to University Place, like that handheld radio is no bueno. And could I hit a repeater? There are 2 primary repeaters, one in Tacoma and then one down in University Place. But ultimately, when you jump on somebody else's repeater, number one, you got a lot of traffic that you may have to contend with. And 2, it's only good if you can hit that repeater. You might be able to receive some traffic, but you're not gonna be able to send anything. So these are some things you really need to consider when it comes to using handheld radios. Are they really effective in this type of situation? Not for this specific scenario, I'll give it that much. So team, I hope this was value added for your kit bag, walking through and thinking about some of these considerations, but doing more than just talking about it and actually going out and showing you exactly what I'm seeing on the ground as I prepare to actually execute my get home plan for this scenario, right? It's going to be the escape from Tacoma, and I'm certainly looking forward to getting this done. I think it's going to be a great exercise, right, team? And I cannot overemphasize that this type of planning and rehearsals are absolutely critical for you and your safety and your security, so that you can live out, with a sense of confidence, not if, but when the proverbial poop hits the rotating oscillator, right? And you get covered in it. And because you need to work through these things. Everything sounds good in theory. Everything sounds great when you watch a video and people are talking about stuff. Everything sounds great when you read a book. But when you go out and actually start to execute things, that's when things become real. That's when wisdom begins to confirm or challenge the knowledge that you had. So I hope this was value added. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your comments down below as we continue to keep this conversation rolling. As always, until then, you stay out there, you keep grinding, and you stay stoked.